Hi, we are at Zaatari Refugee Camp. My name is Rich Walling. This is the second video in a series of videos that will talk with the residents of Zaatari, the Syrian people who have fled for their lives from the genocidal war that's being committed against them and their families just a few short miles from here. Today we're going to talk about the birth of the Syrian Democratic Revolution. Now, gentlemen, I know, well, first of all, why don't we begin with introductions, starting with Abu Noor. Why don't you introduce yourself, give your name and what you did before the war, before the revolution.
My name is Mutay al-Hariri. I did before the revolution in a factory of ceramic in Damascus. Okay. For the first of the sparkle of the revolution was in Dara, when the boys of school wrote a statement on a wall of a school against the regime. And after the police catch them and take them to the police department and punish them by pulling the nails from the fingers. And after the families of the kids complain about this to the government, but the government, to Al-Assad regime, but sorry, to the government, but the Assad regime didn't behave towards them as if nothing is happening. After that, the demonstration started in Daraa, and the police and the government faced this by shooting fire on the demonstrators. And you know this, especially the story of Hamza al-Khatib when captured them and died in the prison. They deformed the body of this man, this boy. He's a boy school, about 10 years old. The regimes make like this things that he will stop the revolution, but we will continue our revolution. What is the cost it is?
Right. Sammy, why don't you introduce yourself, tell how old you are, and when the demonstrations began, what did your family do about your safety, but also how did the revolution spread from Daraa?
Okay. Hello, my name is Sammy, I'm from Daraa. I'm 21 years old. I was a university student back in Syria before the war. And when the war began, you know, my friend here spoken about the war, but I was in KSA the first few months, and it was just like going out to the streets and shouting and asking for freedom, but the regime of Al-Assad, he fought it back like aggressively. People carried, you know, olives, they call it?
Signs, protest signs?
Yeah, signs for peace. They carried it and go out and asked for freedom, and he fought that with guns, with bullets. I don't know what reason, maybe to keep his throne, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
To make them safe.
When I got back to Syria with my family, it was like hellfire in my place. No police, nothing. Even in the hospital, you can't find any people, and fires everywhere. They burn what they call tires.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they break streets. They cut it. After a while, started to shoot fires at people. Started to kill, and people got armed slowly. They bought guns and armors, and after a while started to use heavy guns with the regime, like what they call it, cannon?
Mm-hmm. Cannons, tanks?
Cannons and tanks, and it got really bad. While time it got really bad, and we couldn't help it but to escape to Zaatari. Why? My house had been blown with a rocket.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I was in Zaatari, because if I was in my house, I would be blown to pieces. I came with my family and started to watch TV and listen. Every day, 100, 200 dies in every place in Syria. And what you asked about spreading.
Well, and so how did the people finally stand up to the regime? I know, for example, the revolutionaries. You say they bought guns,
Yeah.
but then members of the regime deserted the regime. They left the regime,
Yeah, that's
and they joined the revolution.
That's true.
Why don't you talk about the men who joined the revolution, the FSA, the Free Syrian Army, and then also their brothers, their cousins, their fathers, their relatives, who are also what we know as jihadists. So why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Khalil. I'm from Daraa. I'm a teacher of primary school. I'm 28 years old. Yes, I'm a person of Daraa. Yes, in the beginning, the regime, yes, the population or in Daraa, at the first, we go out in a peace demonstration, but the regimes Al-Assad doesn't respond. So the foundation and the foundation a group of army. When the war didn't have to they want to freedom in Syria, they come to fight the groups of regime and to fight against the Assad regime. There are a lot of groups which fights in Syria against Al-Assad because the war didn't do anything in Syria.
Mm-hmm.
There's like Jabhat al-Nusra. Most of them are Syrian people. Yes, but a little of numbers from the outside of the border.
Just to explain to my American friends and the politicians and leaders back in America, jihadist is a word that means fighting in the name of God against a great evil. And these gentlemen will talk a little bit more about that, and we'll explain more in an upcoming video. But like the American Revolution, you had several different groups or layers of soldiers fighting against England. You had the Continental Army, you had the state militias, and so too in the Syrian Revolution, you have the Free Syrian Government in Exile called the National Coalition. They're located in Turkey, and the Free Syrian Army is the army that fights under the authority of the National Coalition. You also have what we might call irregular troops, like the state militias, and those are the jihadin. Those are the men who have organized themselves into fighting units, fighting alongside with the Free Syrian Army units against the regime. Abu Noor, why don't you just very briefly mention, for example, what does al-Nusra mean, and is it people fighting only in Syria, or do they expect to go beyond the Syrian borders in the future?
For the jihadin, I think they are fighting in Syria. They are very few, but I think after the finishing of war, they will everyone will go back to his country. Now they fought with us because we are in the same blood. We are Muslims, and they know the regime. What's happened? What's make for us the regime? They killed us and rape us and kidnap us. If everything is worse, better the regimes make for us.
Okay. Thank you. Now, just very briefly,
Okay.
Yes, Abu Noor.
I want to talk, but now we'll make it again. Yes.
Well, we'll talk about the jihadin in our next video.
Yes.
In our next video, we'll focus on the jihadin.
Yes, I focus now. In my mind, I will focus about them.
Okay.
Okay.
But let's just conclude by the stating that most of the men of the regime's army are Sunni Muslim, as is most of the population of Syria. his army was on the verge of collapse, and for all intents and purposes, what was once a mighty army in the Arab world is now a shadow of itself. But how is he able to continue his war of terror against the Syrian people? Who has he brought in to help him maintain his hold on power? Sammy, who has he brought in?
He brought in Iran and Hezbollah and what's the third?
Russia?
Russia and China. They
And
started
exported from
supplying
Korea.
him with military, with guns, with everything, with money, and just tell him, go and kill your people. Why? Because they had, they call it in Syria, inside Syria, states, what they call it,
Holy places.
قطع عسكرية.
military campaign.
Military,
Yeah.
military campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
They had benefits with Syria. They had how can I say it?
شو بدك تقول؟
إنه في لهم مصالح مع سوريا.
Go ahead.
Relation.
There is a relation, good relation between
Relation.
them.
Relation,
with the
yes.
government.
Yeah, they don't want to break it, and they want to
Persia.
make use of Syria. That's why they supply anything Syria asks, the Assad asks, to kill his people, to keep the relationship good. Because if they lose, the Assad lose, who will give them their money?
Mm-hmm.
And how will you get it back?
Right.
Yeah.
So let's conclude this video, and so just as an overview, peaceful protests in Dara started. There was police brutality. People took to the streets, and then when the regime responded with military force, the revolution began in earnest. Gentlemen, is there anything you'd like to say to America before we go?
I will send to Obama, Mr. Obama, or President Obama, a letter that will Syrian people will explode in the future. Yeah, if you don't do anything in Syria, and the numbers of jihadis will increase in the future, and you can't fight them. You cannot fight them in the future. So now you can enter in this time and help the Syrian people. They sack few, and you can help them. All the Syrian people realize that you can help the people, but you don't to help them.
Right.
Now all the Syrian people hate Russian government. Korean, South Korean government, China government, Persian government. We don't know. We don't want to say we hate American government because they respect of the humanity, and if you fair on the Israel city or Israel country, we are keen to make a relation with the Israel in the future, but don't accuse of the Arab land. We can make a conversation and make a dialogue with the Syrian, the new Syrian or free Syrian with the Israeli government in the future.
And Abinur, why don't you finish? What kind of Syria do you hope to see once the revolution is won and victorious?
I think the democracy.
A democracy.
Yes, the democracy will be in Syria, and everything. And there must, I am sure, there must be equality between the Christian and the Muslims and the Durzi and the Alawi. There is no any difference between them, and we are human peoples. We are Arabic. We are the same blood.
Okay. Thank you. So this concludes our second video. Thank you, and we'll be back again with our next video. We'll talk in depth more about the jihadin and what it means to fight in the name of God. Just as in America, our young men and women fight in the name of God and country, so too the young men and women of Syria. Thank you.